Ravi Olmeth, set the toll down and keep your hands where I can
These
see.
are legitimate pharmacy orders for legitimate
The
patients.
fentanyl coming through Larkfield was nowhere near normal.
Ravi Olmeth operated Larkspur Pharmacy for 12 years with an active DEA registration and a pharmacist license the state of Ohio trusted him to use responsibly. 310,000 fentanyl dosage units later, that trust is what put him in handcuffs.
Near normal.
Pain patients don't disappear because the numbers make you uncomfortable. I feel what doctors
Cash fills from the same small prescriber group kept moving through your back door.
So now help.
Ravi Olmeth would not answer that question. Not that afternoon. Not to the two diversion investigators standing across the counter with a federal warrant already served. And not later, when the number attached to his pharmacy became public. 310,000 dosage units of fentanyl. 12 years of an Ohio pharmacist license. One independent storefront on a suburban strip in Beaver Creek. 4 years of orders flagged inside a federal monitoring system before a single agent walked through the door. What the investigators would prove in the months that followed was that every count of every prescription was already documented in the distributor data before Olmeth ever suspected he was being watched. Before we go any further, I want to know something. When you hand a prescription across a pharmacy counter, do you actually think about who's on the other side of it? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We cover the case as the local newsberries in a 2-minute segment. Ravi Olmeth was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1979, the second child of two immigrant parents who had arrived in the United States separately in the mid-1970s and met at a Telugu Cultural Association meeting on the campus of Ohio State. His father, Krishnan, worked as a hospital pharmacist at Riverside Methodist for 31 years. His mother, Sudha, taught mathematics at a public middle school in Upper Arlington. The family lived in a modest 2-story brick house on a cul-de-sac lined with sugar maples, and by every account, the household ran on discipline, quiet expectation, and the assumption that the children would do better than the parents had. Ravi's older sister went into radiology. Ravi went into pharmacy without ever really being asked whether he wanted to. His father talked about the profession at dinner. His father brought home the pharmacy trade journals. His father took Ravi with him on weekends when the hospital pharmacy was quiet, showed him the counting trays, the labels, the pale green mortars, and explained in the careful and unhurried way he explained everything, that a pharmacist was the last person standing between a prescription and a patient. That phrase stayed with Ravi long enough to appear, verbatim, in the personal statement he submitted with his application to the Ohio State University College of Pharmacy in 1997. He was accepted. He completed his Doctor of Pharmacy degree in 2003, passed the North American Pharmacist Licensure examination the same year, and took a staff position at a Kroger pharmacy in Grove City, where his evaluations from a supervisor named Cynthia Merchant described him as, quote, thorough, patient with customers, and unusually careful with Schedule II documentation, end quote. He married in 2006. His wife, Priya, was a pediatric dentist he had met through a family friend. They bought their first house in 2008 in a subdivision outside Dublin, Ohio, put down 20%, and Ravi began saving towards something his father had encouraged for years, but never done himself. He wanted his own pharmacy, an independent, his name over the door. In 2013, at the age of 33, Ravi Olmeth acquired Larkspur Pharmacy, a single-location retail pharmacy in Beaver Creek, Ohio, from a retiring owner who had operated the store since 1994. The purchase was financed through a small business administration loan, secured against the Dublin house and the value of the pharmacy's existing customer file. Ravi and Priya moved to a larger house in Beaver Creek that same year. Their daughter, Annika, was born the following spring. For the first 6 years of ownership, Larkspur Pharmacy operated the way small, independent pharmacies operate everywhere. Ravi filled prescriptions, dispensed advice at a consultation window, delivered to elderly customers who could not drive, and competed for margin against the chain pharmacies within a 3-mile radius. He kept 2 full-time pharmacy technicians on staff. He renewed his Ohio pharmacist license on time every 2 years. He renewed his DEA registration on time every 3. The Ohio Board of Pharmacy Inspectors visited every 18 to 24 months on average. Their reports through 2019 recorded no significant findings. His father visited the store on a Saturday in the fall of 2015 and, according to Priya's later testimony, told his son that he was proud of him. It was, she would say, the last time Ravi ever spoke about the pharmacy without something behind his eyes. Somewhere in the accounting statements from that period, buried among the routine invoices for atorvastatin and metformin and amoxicillin, a different pattern was beginning to form. Not enough to see from the outside, not yet, but the seed of it was there. By the time anyone in a federal building in Arlington, Virginia looked closely enough at the numbers to notice 4 years would have passed. To understand what happened at Larkspur Pharmacy, you have to understand the system Ravi Olmenth was inside of, because the system is what made the operation possible, and the system is also what eventually caught him. Every pharmacy in the United States that dispenses controlled substances holds a DEA registration. The registration is not a license. It is a permission slip issued by the federal government, and it authorizes the holder to purchase, store, and dispense drugs listed under the Controlled Substances Act. Schedule II drugs, the most tightly regulated category, include fentanyl, oxycodone, hydrocodone, morphine, methadone, and amphetamine salts. To purchase these substances from a wholesale distributor, a pharmacy must transmit its DEA number with every order, and the distributor must transmit every order it fills back to the DEA through what is called the Suspicious Order Monitoring System. The Suspicious Order Monitoring System is the government's answer to a decade of pill mill scandals that produced the American opioid epidemic. It requires distributors, by federal statute, to identify orders of unusual size, orders of unusual frequency, and orders that deviate from a pharmacy's normal purchasing pattern, and to report those orders to the Drug Enforcement Administration. It is not new. It has existed since 1970. It has been the subject of billion-dollar civil settlements against distributors who failed to report. It has been the enforcement backbone of every major pharmacy diversion prosecution of the last 15 years. For a small suburban pharmacy in Beaver Creek, Ohio, the baseline order profile for fentanyl products should have been small. Fentanyl in transdermal patch form is prescribed almost exclusively for opioid-tolerant patients with chronic severe pain, typically cancer patients, hospice patients, and a narrow subset of patients with intractable, non-malignant pain, managed by pain specialists. The immediate-release pill formulations are prescribed even more narrowly. An independent pharmacy serving a residential customer base in a Dayton suburb, without a large oncology referral network and without a co-located pain clinic, should have been ordering a handful of fentanyl patch boxes in any given quarter. Perhaps a few dozen units of the highest potency 100 microgram per hour formulation across an entire year. The distributor that supplied Larkspur Pharmacy was a regional wholesaler operating out of a warehouse near Columbus. Their records, later subpoenaed by federal investigators, would show that Larkspur's fentanyl orders in 2019 were within normal parameters for a pharmacy of its size. In 2020, the orders began to grow. By 2021, Larkspur was ordering fentanyl patches at a volume between 7 and 12 times the median for comparable Ohio independents. By 2022, the pharmacy's orders of 100 microgram per hour patches specifically, the highest legally manufactured strength, were the highest of any independent pharmacy in a 14-county area. None of this was hidden. It could not be hidden. Every order was reported to the DEA in real time by the distributor, as federal law required. Every order sat in a database maintained in a federal office in Arlington, Virginia. The data was there. It was, in the phrase that Assistant U.S. Attorney David Merchant would later use in his sentencing memorandum, quote, a complete multi-year record of the operation's scale, produced by routine industry reporting, end quote. The system was working. The paperwork was intact. The pharmacy was, on the surface, in compliance. That was the entire design, and it was what allowed the operation to continue for 4 years. The recruitment happened sometime in the first quarter of 2020, though the exact date has never been established because Ravi Olmenth, on advice of counsel, never gave a full narrative statement to investigators. What can be reconstructed comes from the testimony of two cooperating witnesses, the pharmacy's own prescription records, and financial forensics on Olmenth's personal bank accounts. The context matters. In early 2020, the pandemic shuttered non-essential retail across the state. Pharmacy foot traffic collapsed. Larkspur's front-of-store sales, which had subsidized the razor-thin margins on prescription dispensing, fell by nearly 40% in the second quarter alone. Olmenth carried a mortgage, a business loan, 2 staff salaries, and the fixed operating costs of a retail storefront that was suddenly seeing a third of its normal customers. His accountant, in a memorandum dated May 2020, projected that Larkspur would be insolvent within 18 months if the trend continued. The person who recruited him, identified in the indictment only as Individual 1, a network coordinator who was later separately charged, approached Olmenth through a mutual contact at a pharmacy trade event. The pitch was simple. The network had access to prescribers willing to write. The network had customers willing to pay cash at a premium. What the network needed was a pharmacy willing to fill volume without asking the questions a pharmacist is trained to ask. Olmenth said yes. The first fill was recorded on Larkspur's dispensing log on July 8, 2020. A prescription for fentanyl 100 microgram per hour transdermal patches, 10 patches, written by a prescriber named Dr. Adrian Petracchi, presented by a customer whose home address was in Dayton, 37 minutes from the pharmacy. Cash payment. No insurance. No prior fill history at Larkspur. That prescription contained every textbook red flag cataloged in the DEA's own pharmacist diversion enforcement reference. The out-of-catchment patient address. The cash payment where insurance was available for the drug. The high-potency Schedule II formulation. The prescriber whose name did not appear anywhere else in the pharmacy's records. The lack of any prior relationship between patient and pharmacy. Any one of those signs, standing alone, was sufficient to trigger a verification call under the professional standards Olmenth had been taught in his first year of pharmacy school. He verified nothing. He filled the prescription. He accepted the cash. He locked the register at the end of the night and drove home. The pattern established that afternoon repeated with escalating frequency over the following 4 years. In 2020, Larkspur filled 63 network-affiliated fentanyl prescriptions. In 2021, the number was 218. In 2022, 401. In 2023, 572. In the first 8 months of 2024, before the operation ended, the pharmacy filled another 348. The prescriptions came from a small pool of complicit prescribers. 3 physicians and 2 nurse practitioners accounted for over 90% of the volume. 2 of those prescribers had active pain management practices that provided some patina of legitimacy. The other 3 were, in essence, credentials for hire. In several cases, prescriptions were written on stolen or forged pads bearing the DEA numbers of legitimate prescribers who had no knowledge that their credentials were being used. Olmenth ran a compliance theater. He kept the logbooks current. He filed the required inventory reports. He answered the phone politely when a manufacturer's representative called. He was, in every visible respect, the same careful pharmacist whose OSU supervisor had once described him as unusually careful with Schedule II documentation. The 2 pharmacy technicians on staff at Larkspur were not part of the operation. They were told, on the days the network's customers came in, to take an early lunch or to work the front of the store. One technician, Chelsea Prendergast, would later tell investigators that she had begun to notice the pattern by mid-2022. She noticed the same customers returning at intervals. She noticed the cash. She noticed that Olmenth handled these transactions himself, never delegating. She said nothing. She was 24 years old. She had student loans. She needed the job. The financial forensics reconstructed the money trail with clinical precision. Cash deposits into Olmenth's personal checking account began in August 2020 and grew in tandem with the prescription volume. The deposits were structured in amounts below the $10,000 reporting threshold, typically between $4,000 and $8,000 per deposit, distributed across multiple bank branches within a 50-mile radius. Over 4 years, the deposits totaled approximately $1.8 million in cash beyond Larkspur's reported revenue. The money paid off the business loan ahead of schedule. It funded a lake house in Hocking Hills. It sat in a brokerage account under his wife's name that she would later testify, credibly, she had never known existed. 310,000 dosage units. That is the government's estimate of the total volume of fentanyl dispensed by Larkspur Pharmacy to the network between July 2020 and August 2024. Fentanyl is measured in micrograms because a milligram is a lethal quantity for an opioid-naive adult. 310,000 units of a Schedule II opioid sold into a regional distribution network that fed street-level markets in Dayton, Cincinnati, and northern Kentucky is a public health event of a magnitude that does not have a precise numeric expression in terms of downstream harm. It has instead a series of names attached to it. Names that would appear, one by one, in the sentencing memoranda filed by the prosecution. The catalyst was not a body. It was not a whistleblower. It was not a raid. The catalyst was a spreadsheet. In the fall of 2023, an analyst in the DEA's Diversion Control Division office in Arlington, Virginia, ran a routine query against the suspicious order monitoring database. The query filtered for independent pharmacies whose fentanyl product orders, measured in dosage units per quarter, exceeded 5 standard deviations from the median for pharmacies of comparable size and geographic profile. The output was a list. The list was short. Larkspur Pharmacy of Beaver Creek, Ohio, appeared on it. The analyst forwarded the flag to the DEA Diversion Control Field Office, responsible for Southern Ohio, based in Cincinnati. The case was assigned to a diversion investigator named Karen Bristow, a former hospital pharmacist herself, who had spent 11 years working diversion investigations after leaving clinical practice. Bristow's first move was to pull 3 years of Larkspur's distributor orders and cross-reference them against the pharmacy's dispensing records, which she obtained through a routine administrative subpoena. The numbers reconciled. Larkspur was ordering fentanyl in the volumes the distributor data suggested, and Larkspur was dispensing that fentanyl through prescriptions logged in its point-of-sale system. On paper, the pharmacy was clean, but the dispensing records told a second story when Bristow started mapping them. The patient addresses on the fentanyl prescriptions were concentrated in a corridor stretching from central Dayton down through Middletown toward Cincinnati. Almost none were within Beaver Creek. The prescribers were a set of 5 names, none of whom operated practices near the pharmacy. The payment method, in nearly every case, was cash. The prescription volume per prescriber, extrapolated to the number of patients each was legally supposed to be treating, was medically implausible. Bristow spent 2 months building the map. In February 2024, she brought her file to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Ohio and requested authorization to run an undercover prescription presentation against Larkspur Pharmacy. The authorization was granted. On March 6, 2024, a DEA agent operating undercover, using a prescription written on the stationery of a real Ohio pain management physician who was cooperating with the investigation, walked into Larkspur Pharmacy at 2:14 in the afternoon. The prescription was for fentanyl 100 microgram per hour transdermal patches, 5 patches, with 2 refills authorized. The prescription bore an address for a patient in Cincinnati. The agent paid in cash. She was in her mid-30s. She had never been to Larkspur before. Everything about the transaction, on its face, satisfied every criterion for mandatory verification under professional pharmacist standards. Ravi Olmenth filled the prescription in 11 minutes. He did not call the prescriber. He did not check the state prescription monitoring database, which every pharmacist in Ohio has a legal obligation to check for controlled substance dispensations. He counted the patches into a prescription bag, handed it across the counter, took the cash, and told the agent to have a nice day. The agent walked to her car in the strip mall parking lot. She placed the sealed bag into an evidence envelope. She started her engine and drove 3 blocks before pulling over to log the transaction in her field notes. The undercover operation had succeeded on the first attempt. In her notes, she recorded the exact time she had walked out of the pharmacy. 2:25 p.m. We are about to get into the investigation itself, and this is where the case really opens up. If you have made it this far, subscribe. This channel does not let cases like this get buried in a 2-minute local news segment. There is a reason you are seeing this story here, and not on your evening broadcast. The undercover buy on March 6, 2024, was the beginning of the phase of the investigation the public would eventually see. Bristow ran 2 additional undercover presentations over the following 6 weeks, using different agents and different prescriptions. Each one presented a red flag profile that any competent pharmacist would have flagged. Each one was filled without verification. On May 14, 2024, the U.S. Attorney's Office authorized the execution of a federal search warrant on Larkspur Pharmacy and on Olmith's residence in Beaver Creek. The search warrant was executed at 6:45 in the morning on May 22, 2024. Federal agents from DEA, IRS, Criminal Investigation, and the FBI entered the pharmacy simultaneously, with a second team entering Olmith's home. The pharmacy team seized every physical prescription record from the previous 5 years, the point-of-sale computer system, the Schedule II inventory, and a locked filing cabinet in the back office that contained, among other items, a handwritten ledger of cash transactions organized by month. The ledger was not a piece of evidence anyone had expected to find. It was, in the words of the special agent who cataloged it, quote, "the kind of document you assume exists but never actually recover," end quote. The ledger recorded, in Olmith's own handwriting, monthly cash intake from the network, cross-referenced against prescription counts by prescriber. It was maintained through the end of April 2024. The final entry was dated 3 days before the first undercover buy. The residential search recovered a second cache. Bank statements for 3 brokerage accounts in his wife's name that she was not aware existed. A safe in the basement containing $47,000 in cash. A laptop with encrypted communications between Olmith and 2 members of the distribution network, recovered by an FBI forensic examiner over the following 4 months. The text message thread with individual 1, the network coordinator, ran to over 1,100 messages spanning 3.5 years. Selected exchanges were later filed as government exhibits in the sentencing proceedings. Individual 1, October 12, 2021. Need to move 100 boxes of the 100 mics before end of month. Can you take them? Olmith. I can take 60 by the 15th. Rest end of month. Individual 1, March 3rd, 2022. New scripts coming through on Petrocchi's pad. Same rates. Olmith. Fine. Send the customer list ahead. Individual 1, September 8th, 2023. Heat coming from anywhere on your end. Olmith. No. Books are clean. Everything looks like a normal fill on my system. Individual 1. Okay. Keep it that way. The financial forensics team, working from bank records and Olmith's own ledger, reconstructed the operation's cash flow with a precision that left no room for the defense theory that Olmith had been an unwitting participant. Every deposit had a corresponding entry in the ledger. Every ledger entry had a corresponding set of prescriptions in the pharmacy's dispensing record. Every prescription had a corresponding distributor order that had been reported to the DEA in real time under the suspicious order monitoring system, going back 4 years. The smoking gun was the distributor data, not because it was hidden, because it was never hidden. It had been sitting in a federal database the entire time. The confrontation happened at Larkspur Pharmacy on the morning of the search warrant execution. Ravi Olmith had arrived at the pharmacy at 6:30 a.m., his normal opening time, to prepare the store for the day. He was standing behind the counter, keying in the alarm code and pulling up the point-of-sale system when the agents entered. Karen Bristow, who had been building the case for 6 months, entered first. She held the warrant in her left hand and her credentials in her right. Behind her were 4 federal agents in blue windbreakers with DEA stenciled across the back and 2 uniformed Beaver Creek police officers providing perimeter. Bristow. Mr. Olmonth, I am diversion investigator Karen Bristow with the DEA. I have a federal search warrant for these premises. I need you to step away from the counter and place your hands where I can see them. Olmonth. I don't understand. Bristow. Sir, step away from the counter, hands where I can see them. Olmonth. What is this about? Bristow. We will discuss that in a moment. Right now, I need you to comply with the warrant. Olmonth complied. He stepped back from the counter, placed his hands flat on the pharmacy's low glass display case, and stood in silence while 2 of the agents moved past him toward the back office. He was not handcuffed at that point. The warrant was for the premises. His arrest would come 3 hours later, at his home, after the search team had cataloged the ledger. Bristow read him a summary of the allegations. Distribution of controlled substances outside the usual course of professional practice. Conspiracy to distribute. Maintaining a drug-involved premises. She informed him of his right to remain silent and of his right to counsel. She asked him whether he wished to make any statement. He did not answer immediately. He stood there, his hand still on the glass, and looked at the wall behind Bristow, which was covered with framed certifications. His Ohio pharmacist license, his DEA registration, his Doctor of Pharmacy diploma from Ohio State, a community service award from the Beaver Creek Chamber of Commerce, dated 2016. Olmonth. I would like to speak with an attorney. Those were the last words he spoke to any federal investigator without counsel present. He would not speak again on the record until his change of plea hearing 11 months later. Ravi Olmonth was indicted by a federal grand jury sitting in the Southern District of Ohio on July 18, 2024. The indictment charged him with 1 count of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances under 21 U.S.C. Section 846, 23 counts of distribution of a controlled substance outside the usual course of professional practice under 21 U.S.C. Section 841, and 1 count of maintaining a drug-involved premises under 21 U.S.C. Section 856. His defense attorney was a criminal defense specialist named Nathan Carpel out of Columbus, retained on referral. Carpel filed the standard motions, a motion to suppress the ledger, arguing it fell outside the scope of the warrant, denied. A motion to challenge the distributor data on chain of custody grounds, denied. A motion in limine to exclude the pharmacy technician's testimony about Olmonth's behavior, denied. In February 2025, Olmonth entered a change of plea agreement with the government. He pleaded guilty to the conspiracy count and to 5 representative counts of distribution, in exchange for the government's agreement to recommend a sentence at the lower end of the applicable guideline range. The sentencing hearing took place on May 6, 2025.